Hello. Hi. Welcome back to the V Square, episode 2, with your favorite hosts, Vivek and Vidhika. I'm Vivek.
And I'm Vidhika.
And we're happy you're listening to us again. Yeah, thanks for being here. We have to tell you that our first episode is now live on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. And the YouTube channel will be in our Twitters. So please go check that out. Like, share, subscribe, do all those things. All those
You
salesy
don't
things
have to
that
do all
Vidhika
those
really
things
likes
if
to
you
do.
don't want to. But it's
Thanks for
hilarious. It
being
sounds
very,
so
very assertive and aggressive in your salesiness, Vidhika, today. It's great.
this feels so it feels so interesting and official to say like, on all the platforms and all the
On all the
things. But
platforms.
yeah,
I know.
technically that's true.
Yeah, it feels like we're digital grown-ups in a way that we weren't prepared to be,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Influencer
Yeah.
grown-ups.
And the
Uh,
episode is, as Visa noted last time, the length of a Bollywood movie. So if you're into Bollywood, if you're not into Bollywood, either way, feel free to check it out.
yeah.
And if there's a part of it that you're interested in, we can tell you which little snippet to listen to if you don't want to listen to 2.5 hours.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I was just gonna say, like, there's so if you're not if you don't want to listen to all 2.5 hours of it, there's like we've timestamped the heck out of it. We've put a lot of interesting nuggets. And one note for everyone is like we talk about lightning strikes, just going and like I don't know, 20, 30 minutes later, an actual freaking lightning strike happens
Wait
in
a
the
spoiler
podcast.
alert, Vivek. They were supposed to
Hey,
find
come
that
on,
out on
we're
their
on
own.
episode 2. We get to talk about episode 1. It's already out. There's no spoiler.
Okay, that's fair.
It's like after the movie's out. Come on. Like anyway, but yes, it's kind of a little teaser for
Easter egg.
people to join. Yeah. So please go check that out. It would be awesome to have more listeners. We have, I don't know, I think 6 views right now, which is pretty cool.
Hey, I think we've made it. To me, that's I
Big
mean,
time.
6 views means it's more than me and you. So I think
We
that's
said
pretty
it would be
legit.
3. You, me, and our patron saint, Lucas, who said he would commit to listening to all the episodes
Lucas,
in the
careful
limited
what you
series run.
careful what you wish for, what you commit to, because
Yeah.
we're gonna be quizzing you to make sure.
No, but seriously though, shout out to Lucas. Like,
Yeah.
hey, thank you so much, Lucas, like for being our cheerleader, even when we didn't have any episodes up. Really, it gave us a little tiny boost of confidence to just like keep playing with this thing.
We have at least one person that's committed to this, and yeah, that was you. Thank you,
Exactly.
Lucas.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Weekly check in. How's it going? How are you feeling? What's coming up for you?
What's coming up for me? Well, I'm feeling tired. It's
Mm,
been a busy couple of days in mostly good ways, but just like the sleep debt is catching up with me. Um, but what's coming up for me? Hmm. I think I've been thinking a little bit about like how lately I've been, at least for the last week or so, I feel like I've been more present in like in-person things, which
mm,
is good. Like it's wonderful. Like I've been, meeting people in person and kind of doing things very locally, and it's
mm,
been exactly what I wanted.
mm,
But I am starting to feel like I am neglecting like, people I really, really want to keep up with, who I typically communicate with like via message or online or something like that.
mm.
And it's not a tension that I've felt for a while. I guess the pandemic kind of makes you, or has made me get very used to just online being almost the primary mode in some
Mm.
ways. So
Right.
that's something that I'm like newly navigating. I feel like newly navigating again, I guess.
Hmm. Gotcha. So do you feel like you're wanting to get so are you feeling like it's more IRL and you want to go back to a little bit of the online texty digitally things or the other way around?
It feels like it's more IRL. It's been more IRL recently,
Right.
which is actually like I think really good. So like I'm not. It sounds like I'm complaining. I realize that I'm not actually complaining. I'm
Yeah,
really
stop complaining,
grateful.
Vidika.
I know.
God, be grateful. Joke about the outcomes you want. Oh
I know. You'd think I would have learned something after the last episode, right? But
no.
but yeah, look, I am really grateful, truly, that it is more IRL. I think it's so nice to just like I've missed that.
Hmm.
So that part's been really nice. It's been really nice to hang out with people like within walking distance of me. That's something that was something I've always wanted and like haven't really had since college, right? Like in many ways, I've been thinking about how it's almost like college, but with we have more money now and we're maybe it's a little healthier and some other perks. So no, mostly it's good. I think what I'm feeling is not so much that I want more online connection, but more that I have many friends who, I shouldn't say many friends, I have several friends who live not here, right?
Yeah.
And my primary means of communicating with them and keeping in touch is just messaging them and calling them. But because I've been doing this thing that I've wanted to do, which is like be present locally and in person, it's kind of made it so that my energy is just like I come back from something social, I'm drained, and then I have like a little bit of time to myself and barely, enough time to then I almost get overwhelmed by like, okay, where do I start? How do I keep up? How do I catch up? So I've been feeling kind of behind, and it's strange because I know my friends will understand. It's more like an internal feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm so behind. I have to find time for this.
I got you.
Yeah. What's been
It's the
going on with
pull of
you?
social obligation to some extent, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And almost like
Yeah.
this desire to communicate that like, hey, you're on my mind. I'm thinking of you. I just haven't had a minute to breathe.
You know what you can do? You can just say that sentence. You can just text that one thing to
Yeah.
people. Like there's somebody who
Absolutely.
texted me that I was supposed to see them tonight, but we're not going to see each other. But
Mhm.
they sent me a text, and I hadn't gotten back to them all day because I was like thing after thing after thing. I just said, hey, going into recording or whatever, I'll text you at night. Like
Mhm.
blah blah blah. Like good things,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
good
Yeah.
wishes,
Yeah.
happiness, thumbs up,
Exactly.
thumbs upness. What's going on for me? I think this week I've just been thinking a lot about nervous system healing, and I wrote this whole thread about consent pathways. And that's like
Mm.
a very, very long, deep topic for me. But essentially, it's like, when you heal nervous system trauma, stuff like that, you're trying to be more present. Very often, like there's this all or nothing model. You're either present or oh, you're escaping from the present moment.
Mm.
You're not paying attention. But sometimes when you pay attention, it hurts. It's not comfortable. And
Mm.
the most important thing for the nervous system is the consensually noticing. It's not just enduring noticing, right? It's checking in with yourself. It's like, is this too much? Okay, if this is too much, go back to distraction. And if
Mm.
it's not enough, okay, you can, when you feel safe, can go back into notice and be present and stuff like that. But if you're in a traumatized state, or like if attention is a wound for you,
Mm.
then it really matters to get the like to consensually go and not just endure uh presence. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about, sitting a lot with, being just a little
Mm.
bit more present. um yeah, even when I'm like mindlessly scrolling, like a little bit of a moment here and there, I'll just like, does this still feel good? Yeah, okay, good, keep scrolling. Do I feel like I can pay attention for a couple seconds without scrolling? Okay, all right, that feels good. Now it's too much. Okay, go back. That kind of thing. Which in a morally, like in a purity test world where like, oh no, why are you letting yourself be distracted? You should just keep going. But
Mm.
it's more the checking in with the inner child. Like if the inner child doesn't
Yeah.
feel safe, that's how safety works, right? It's like it's the yes or no from inside that really matters.
Mhm.
It's not whether you're actually present or not. That matters too. But for the nervous system safety side, it really matters whether you listened when the nervous system said this is too much, and you
Mm.
listened when your nervous system said, oh no, I can take some more, that kind of thing.
So
So
almost like it sounds like you're saying like being attuned to the moment enough to know when you can dip your feet into something, when you need to step back, like not treating it as a dial that you dial more so than
yes,
an on and off switch, right? Like,
absolutely. And
yeah.
also, like the thing that happens when it's not an on and off switch is it helps you go past the cultural programming of either on and off. But
Mhm.
the checking in process, it's the greasing the consent pathway to ask, are you
With
good?
yourself.
Yes, with
Yeah.
yourself.
Mm.
Yeah, and in my view, like I wrote this thread about consent pathways that apply out,
Sounds like I have
between
homework.
people. between people as well as within ourselves. But
Mm.
I think, yeah, I was primarily coming from an internal place, but I think it's actually this meta principle that might apply, that seems to apply for me everywhere. And that's what I go into in the thread. But yeah, it's a very long topic. We'd probably talk about it another time too.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of, uh, it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of like a lot of times avoidance starts, right? Because we are trying to run away from something and we don't feel safe enough to feel something. And then we carry those habits into the future when they don't serve us anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I will check out your thread. Good
Oh
plug for it.
yeah, okay. I'm so glad you called it homework, because now I get to be like, yes, I assigned this, Vidhika.
You know what? I'm going to check in with myself and decide that I may not want to do this homework. So don't get your hopes
Okay.
up.
Ouch, ouch. Oh my God. I did not expect to be on the receiving end of these boundaries. Very
Well,
good.
life's full of
Yeah.
surprises.
Correct. It is. Yeah, so that's what's been going on mostly. Let's see if, so we should tell people that we have a guest for the show too. Yes.
Mystery guest.
Not a mystery, not too much of a mystery anymore. But let's see. How do we introduce our guest today? Okay, I'm just gonna read her Twitter bio. So
I
our
don't
guest today,
see our guest, Vivek. Have you let our guest in?
yeah, I'm just gonna do
Oh,
that
okay.
when I. Okay, she's a designer,
Okay.
researcher. She used to be a journalist and editor, and she says we must risk delight. One of my favorite things I've ever read. So everyone, please welcome Catherine Woodiwiss.
Hi.
Hi.
Ooh. Hey, Catherine.
How are you guys? It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you.
Yeah, we're doing good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh my gosh. It was such a mysterious and delightful invitation. So,
So let me guess, you decided to risk delight?
hey. You know what? Yes.
Love that. Okay, yeah. So no, we were just like, so to tell you about this podcast thing, I literally tweeted, you know what a great job would be, is like to be a talk show host, to get paid to
Mm-hmm.
just talk to people, be vulnerable, make people laugh along, and I don't know, as long as you have a producer taking care of everything. And Vidhika responded to my tweet saying, "Hey, me too. You want to co-host a talk show?"
And then I
Amazing.
made sure that, I stuck to it in terms of a producer take care of everything. So Vivek is taking care of everything. It's working
Thank
out
you.
great.
I was going to say, so who's the producer here? Are you both co-producing or handing off the hat back and forth?
I'm helping with editorial decisions, but I'm letting Vivek manage.
She's helping a lot. In fact, she's making the majority of the editorial. In fact, all of them. Yes.
No, all the good ones I made. Okay, all the bad ones I did not. Let's
Yeah.
just put it that way.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
right. Plausible deniability among both of you. That's going to recipe
The
for
job of
great
a good producer is to
collaboration.
just say yes when you're.
Yes. Amazing.
Yeah. So
It's the
anyway,
best though,
welcome.
right? Just
What was that?
sitting around and just like having conversations and interviewing people and asking questions is the best, right? Like
Totally.
I'm usually not on the answering questions side, so this is fun and also a little scary. It's gonna be my mission to ask you guys as many questions as possible in this
could.
conversation.
That would be fun. And we're like throwing the ball back and forth. Like we've got two researchers in the room. I like it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, 2 researchers. Okay, I feel super left out. Oh my god. I'm gonna take notes to compensate for not being a researcher, because I can do the research.
Researchers always need note takers, so we're so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Record our brilliance in real time so we can come back.
That way we don't have to go back through the transcripts and
Right.
mine all the gold. Yeah,
exactly. But so Catherine, you said you're usually on the other side. Is that because? So can you say a little more about that? What do you mean? Like, do you do that for work? And did you do that as a journalist?
Yeah, so I've been a form of researcher my whole professional life, really my whole life, I think, whether or not I was supposed to be doing it in school or what have you. But that is what I love. Conversation. I love stories. And I think I learned really early on, I had always wanted to be a journalist. To me, a journalist was kind of the sexiest thing that you could be, especially, preferably in, faraway places writing beautiful stories that touch the world. So, you know, minor ambitions. But I think what I quickly learned, even in undergrad, studying anthropology and international development and whatnot, was that asking questions and hearing other people's stories was really just the best, for lack of a better, more sophisticated framework. It's just the best. And I think as a journalist, interviewing, like, finding a story is really fun. Having that little spark of there's something here and it's worth pursuing is really fun. But actually finding the people to talk to and getting to ask people questions about their lives and having people open up to you, just like the experience of just asking, can I ask you some questions? And people say yes, is like this incredible gift. And it's also a power, and it also has a lot of responsibility. But I just can't believe still how eager people are to hand you their story if you just ask them kindly. And I think that's carried on now as a design researcher in my day-to-day job. That's still what I do. And I do it for different audiences and with different collaborators. But yeah, I think it's just, I think giving each other stories is a huge gift. And I can't believe that people do it so willingly. And I can't believe that I get to do it for my job still. So that's,
Yeah.
It
is kind of magical, especially considering that these folks are generally strangers, right? Like these are people that don't really owe you anything. And yet there's this sort of implicit, I mean, sometimes we try to make that trust more explicit by including disclaimers about how we're going to use what they tell us and things like that, which I sometimes worry. I'd be curious about your thoughts on this, Catherine. I sometimes worry that some of those protocols are falling away more and more, like as research becomes, like, I love that it's becoming democratized, to use the buzzword, and, you know, becoming more common. But I do feel like some of the things that were in place very intentionally to help build that trust, to create that psychological safety, like, I feel like some of that has just been considered like almost frills and just forgotten. And it's something that bugs me a little bit, or a lot.
I have so many thoughts on that front. I don't know that my thoughts will be like coherent and short and articulatable at all, or articulated well. But yes, I think you've seen that in journalism for a long time. In fact, I thought it was too late for me to be a journalist because still when I was coming through school, it was still kind of accepted that if you wanted to be a journalist, you would be part of the school newspaper and you would be an editor and you would write stories. And I just didn't. I was singing in chorales and choirs, and I was playing in orchestras, and I was in theater. You know, I was kind of already doing all of the things. And so it just, being part of the newspaper wasn't one more thing I could do, but I still wanted to. And so I remember after college moving to Washington, D.C., and the friends I started to meet who were journalists had been people who were like lifelong, really trained. And I just thought, I've already missed the boat somehow. There's no way that I can get that training. I ended up getting to write for what was then a very popular blog at a think tank in DC. It was called Think Progress. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was for a while, it was sort of one of the most shared kind of political blogs. And then that sort of taught me the ropes of kind of what kind of proper ethical, well-documented interviewing looked like. And a lot of it kind of felt instinctual, but it was just really nice to kind of learn what being edited is, learn what being on assignment is versus writing your own stuff. And then I was able to make a transition kind of sideways into being an editor for another publication. So I sort of got into journalism a little bit through a side door without all of the rigorous training, but I really lucked out by having editors and mentors who wanted to really teach me all of it. And I got, grilled in AP style, and it was just kind of like, you just had to learn the ropes, and you kind of couldn't get around it. With design research, I did go through training for that. And so I went through a very rigorous design program where we did read all of the theory and tackle all of the ethics around it, which I'm so grateful for, because I think this is all to say, I think there are many paths to design research now, and I love the democratization of it. And it's a really similar conversation that's been happening in journalism for the last 10 or so years around kind of who gets who gets to
Mhm.
tell the news, right? Who gets to break the
Mm.
story? Who gets to say what is true, what is correct? And then with design research, it's sort of similarly, who gets to tell people stories? Who gets to identify who should be included and not? And I think opening up for more participation is so vital and vitally important to any sort of like common knowledge building project. And it is very easy to just not have any of that ethical training at all, not have any of the how do you create a safe space, how do you let people know ahead of time kind of what you're expecting from them, how do you let people know about privacy, how you're using their data, all these questions that start to be really pretty important. I don't know where I'm going with all this, only to say I really resonate with your question, Vidhika, about it. And I'm curious, have you, how has that come up in your work? Like, how do you handle that as a researcher yourself? Is that something that, are you training others in kind of best practices, or what did training look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I actually don't do on the ground research anymore. And look at Catherine, I have already noticed. She's like,
We all noticed at the same
Oops.
time. I was like giggling way before.
No, but I
I
want
saw
to
it
know.
coming. I saw it coming like 5 seconds before it hit, and I was like, there it
we
is.
see where this is going. Yeah.
And back to you. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm just going to toss it right back. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm going to give a short answer because I want to hear more from you. But like, actually, I don't know if I'm capable of short answers. We'll see we'll see if this ends up being short or not. But basically, so I actually don't do research like day to day anymore. I have since, I think it's funny because I actually, when I was younger, at one point also thought I wanted to be a journalist. I actually was on the school newspaper, the
good for you.
literary magazine, like was really interested in all of those things. And then ended up not going in that direction. And, I don't even remember all of the details. I do remember at one point feeling like there wasn't a ton of latitude in journalism. Like it felt like you had to be really like, I love storytelling. I think we share a lot of interests, and that's part of why you're here. We were, when we were thinking of like, oh, who should we chat with? I was like, oh, we're Catherine, and we're gonna have so much to dig in and into. But I think I felt like in journalism, it was everything had to be a fact, and like ideally, obviously, that doesn't always happen. And like, while there's obviously a lot of value in that, I think for me, I was always really interested in like the crafting the narrative bit, which still is required even with just facts. But I think I started to wonder about like other parts of storytelling. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of cool how we did a little bit of a switcheroo there, where
we did
that early stuff, but then didn't end up going into journalism at all. And so, yeah, for me, how it manifests, since I don't do research day to day anymore, I guess it's not a ton at the moment. I guess I do talk about this stuff though. So I sometimes do talks and stuff, but not even just that. I think anytime, like just recently, there was someone at work that interviewed me about, like she had some project. She wasn't an official researcher, right? She was working on like the DEI staff and wanted to do interviews with a bunch of folks. And so like, as we were talking, I thought she asked some really good questions. She was wonderful at like making me feel safe and really good at like following up on small specific things I said, which I think the art of like research often is knowing exactly when to zoom in and dig in into something and when to like move along. Cause sometimes it's hard. You have limited time with people and you have to make the most of that time. Right. And so one of the things I was telling her at the end is I was almost like encouraging, I was like, you would be a really good design researcher. If you're interested, hit me up, we'll talk. And, but one of the things I noticed myself doing at the very beginning is there wasn't much in the way of like, why I'm asking you these questions, who it's going to be shared with, is your name going to be associated with the things you say? So I noticed that I spent the first like 5 minutes of our conversation probably just asking her those questions, because as a participant, I did care, like I was about to say a bunch of things, some of which were a little bit personal and vulnerable. And I wanted to know like, where is this being used? And so I think especially kind of like you, I don't think I often find myself in the in this hot seat, right, where I'm being asked the questions. You've managed to put me in that right now, but generally, I'm the one asking the questions.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of fun being on the other side and being reminded of like, I feel so strongly about those things, and now I'm like experiencing why it matters. Maybe not everyone cares as much as I do, but I think that it can't hurt, right? Like if it means that someone will open up even a little bit more and divulge something that will really help you understand whatever it is you're trying to understand.
Yeah. It's important to switch it up, I think. I mean, it's there's no greater empathy building than kind of actually having the experience yourself of, oh gosh, like everything I say, how are they going to interpret this thing I said? Like,
exactly.
And all of those questions you asked. Yeah.
In some ways, it's almost like the dog fooding of being a researcher, right? It's like, that's the way that you would go about it. Is
totally. Yeah. Like, how are they going to construe a persona out of everything I just told them?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Great. Yeah.
Vivek, are you feeling really left out because we're not including you in these researcher discussions?
Oh, I'm fascinated. I'm just
How
listening.
do you feel listening to us as researchers? What is this process like for you?
Nice try. I'm not going to fall for it like Vidhika did. But I have so many things. So one thing, well, you said something. Oh man, I have way too many things. One of them is the sense where as a person, but also as a journalist, of there's something here. I know there's something here. I mean, choosing the person you want to talk to, but then you get last episode we were talking about, like a stand-up comic who, when you make there's a bit here somewhere. I haven't fleshed it out yet, but I know there's some tension. There's something weird here. There's a bit here. And Visa and I, we were talking about, there's something we can creatively explore here. This is a book, or this is a podcast, or this is an art. That sense of knowing, it's not quite cognitive, is it? That there's just like there's a feeling. How do you know that? Do you find yourself? Actually, I'm going to leave it there. I'm learning to just leave questions as they are.
I was about to say, Vivek, that was a
Mm-hmm.
leading question. No, I'm kidding.
No. I literally tweeted yesterday. It's like, the sign of an anxious interview style or a conversational style is when you ask a question and you suggest possible answers. So it doesn't look like your question was a dumb one. So it's like, oh, you mean this or this? Like, I'm going to start out. Like, actually, you know what? How do you know?
That is a great like interviewing practice, is just leave it open. So that's cool. You're already workshopping your way into interview research style. I know it as a feeling. It's like something just like being true externally. Like, it almost, to me, this is going to sound so cliche, but it actually does feel this way. It's like a spark, like somewhere outside of me, and it's like, that's it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I know exactly the story I want to write or exactly the research project I want to do, but it's usually like, there is something, follow that. Like, it's just this kind of like spark and insistent, like, yes, ask more there. I can give you an example.
Yes. I was just going to ask if you have one.
Yeah. So I just like kind of, the story just came back on my radar for something totally unrelated earlier today. But I once wrote a story. A friend of mine, I used to live in DC, and a friend of mine told me that there is this church in a neighborhood called Columbia Heights, where I lived close by. And she said, oh yeah, that's where the hackerspace is. And I said, what? And she said, there's a hack space in this church. And I said, that's really interesting. So hackerspace is really, really similar to a makerspace, just kind of a place where, but it's a little more purely technologically inclined. And so it's a place where a lot of people can show up and just like build things, build cool shit together. And sometimes it's software, and sometimes it's like security systems and what have you, but just basically a bunch of like delightful nerds just get together and build stuff. And at the time I was doing a lot of reporting on religion and culture. And I was like, I wonder what a hackerspace is doing in this church. And I did a little more reading into the church, and the church has a long community history of being, Gloria Steinem was there. It also was sort of inadvertently a birthplace of punk in DC. They hosted early shows there. And I think actually the Mackay brothers went there growing up. Anyway, the church itself was fascinating. But then it sort of started to make sense as to why there were hack spaces there. But I was like, this is really interesting because I think there's so much about hackers that seem sort of antithetical to the idea of organized religion, especially the way a lot of Christianity is articulated in the US. But like, this is just a totally oddball, random culture collision. And I bet there's more like that. And I wonder where else that might be happening. And that led me on this trail toward finding other sort of church and hackerspace hybrid places throughout the US. But it also meant I started finding people that were intentionally looking at design jams, design hackathons, like highly collaborative, participatory gatherings to try to approach religion in a different way. And that got me really excited because that's a much bigger kind of cultural conversation around how are we thinking about spiritual practice in the US. And so that was just sort of like, it was a random throwaway comment. And I was like, hack spaces in the church. Like, I got to follow this. There's something cool about religion and tech that's connected here. But to your point about other kind of sources of inspiration for finding things or finding people to talk to, it was this same story where, of course, I found a lot of men who wanted to talk to me about their different like the ways that they were merging program and theology, like programming code and theology, things like that. Totally fascinating. But I was like, it really annoys me that there's only men in my story. And I bet there are awesome women doing this too. And so I just put out a call to like 5 of the most kind of like people who were either in the design jam world or people who were programmers or what, and was like, who do you know who is an awesome lady who's working at this very, very peculiar intersection? And one woman wrote back to me and she suggested one person. And that person had gone through Anglican seminary training as a possible priest. Then she got hired by NASA and started being a NASA storyteller. And then she got hired by a bunch of mobilizing youth organizations in the Middle East and was teaching them design. Like, her story is incredible. And I was like, well, all of a sudden, I just want to write about you. You're like the coolest person I've ever met. And it like, she provided the lead for that story, but also was like, it was just this like beautiful example of like far and away the most interesting individual in this already kind of funny rabbit trail of a story was because of that question too, how to find people. Yeah, that was all a little bit like abstract. So I don't know if any of
that was actually really concrete.
To send you the story, but yeah.
No, it was very we'd love that, and we can happily put it in the show notes. It's just like, it's really cool. One thing you said is like one way to find, not just find stories, but like the radar that's getting set off for you is like unusual intersections. You use the word intersection, and there was also like you put a church and a hackathon. That's not an intersection you usually see, religion and technology. So yeah, that's really interesting. I have another thing, if I may, Vidhika.
Go for it.
I was just going to
say, this is your
researcher
training. I'm all for it.
What was that?
This is your training to be a researcher.
So I feel so babied. Love it. Okay. No, I was going to say, like, earlier we were talking about just, loving story. I think, Vidhika, you also said, you were in, you were in you wrote for the high school paper, all that stuff. There's 2 aspects of that I wanted to talk about. First of all, I think one of my favorite writers, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he was like, every time he's asked about this, he's like, when I was growing up, I couldn't believe you could get paid to just talk to people. And I was like, wait, that's what journalism is? And I went back and thought about it, and I guess that's what it is. Maybe like kind of, right? There's all this ethics, there's all this structure and container, but inside the container is all just talking to people. Very interesting. So, you were saying one angle here was this idea of, missing the boat, right? Feeling like there's this thing, there's this container, there's this pathway to go in this place. And I feel like I've kind of missed the boat to be on that path. And the people that are on that path, it's almost like this escalator or this this track that you're already on, and that kind of takes you in its own direction. And it's a lot of, I can relate to that a fair bit, and I haven't jumped any tracks at all. But I was just curious how you navigated that. How did that come up for you as like, if you were working as I don't know what you were doing before that, but how did that come up? how did that call show itself to you, and what did you do about it? How did you navigate it?
Oh, I love this question. I think with journalism, I just always thought it was the coolest. I remember, I think I was in middle school when a journalist at the time named Samantha Power wrote this huge book called A Problem from Hell, and it was about America in the age of genocide. And she then went on to become a foreign policy advisor in the Obama administration, and she's now, very influential in kind of the American foreign policy world. But at the time, she was a journalist and just was like, I was insistent that I was going to go tell stories that people needed to hear, and my paper wasn't sending me, and so I sent myself to high conflict zones and started reporting, and it was just like the sexiest thing I'd ever heard, and I was like, I have to do that. I think in some ways the insisting on other people's stories being taken seriously just always felt important for me. And kind of insisting on me telling my own story in a way that feels important, I think, felt important to me. So I think the journalism piece was just sort of, I got to DC and was like, I know what I want to be doing. Like, why am I doing anything else? And so I sort of, I was in jobs I was in international development for a little while, public policy for a little while, but I just was sort of like, I need to figure out a way to kind of make this happen. So that was that missing the boat piece. I just sort of, at some point, I think I just decided I had to not care that maybe I had missed the boat and just be like, what if I try it anyway? And that sounds very bold in the retelling. That's not how it felt at the time. But I think my actions were just kind of like, okay, I'm at a public policy think tank, but I'm going to try to write for their blog. And then I was like, okay, I'm getting, an offer from a publication I didn't know much about at the time. It's called Sojourners. I ended up working there for 6 or 7 years because it was a wonderful place to work and gave a lot of freedom in terms of what to write about and things. But that felt important. And I think something kind of similar happened with design, where once I encountered human-centered design and kind of what felt like maybe a little more like the utopian, like 2011, 2012 years of like, what could design be? It was sort of this like full of like very humanist, very full of promise. Like it hadn't quite gotten like fully in bed with tech yet. But I think I felt something similar where it was sort of like, this is this idea that we start with storytelling, we start with listening, and then we actually build things with other people that were actually, it did kind of feel like democratizing solutions in a way that felt exciting. I held on to that for years until it kind of felt like it was the right time to go explore it. I feel like I have a much better answer to this question, and I don't quite know what that answer is. So this is going to bug me. I'm going to send you a DM after we have this call and be like, I know what I should have said, and it was profound and brilliant. But for now, I think, yeah, that sense you asked kind of how to navigate when you feel like you're missing the boat. I think it's just like, when you have an impulse or you have a project that like is insistent on living in the world. And like, I think a lot of people think that is going to be this holistic, perfect idea. And it usually isn't. I think in my experience, both personal and observed, it's usually someone being like, no, I need, this is the direction. And I don't know why I need to go that way. I just really know I do. And I think if it sticks around for long enough, you just have to honor it at some point.
Yeah.
I'm very pro honoring it. and as long as you're ready to live with the consequences. So yeah.
I think there's this like really interesting piece where a lot of this feels like it's almost hard to articulate, right? Like you mentioned something about how the retelling feels perfect, which is something we touched on like last conversation too, because the dots always seem to connect much better when they're in the rear view, and like at the time you're like, oh, what am I doing? Is this right? Is this wrong? It can feel very nebulous. And I saw this poster a while ago, which I remember thinking it was so cheesy and yet so profound, and I wish I could remember the specific phrase, but it was something along the lines of like, what is that voice inside your head that won't shut up, and why aren't you doing what it says, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's interesting that we have those voices in our head of like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do. Like you said something along the lines of like, for design, like there was, you knew that was something you wanted to explore, and you kind of waited till you felt like it was the right time. And I don't know, that concept is so interesting to me. It's almost like we kind of know we have that voices, whether it's almost like, I don't know if we're willing to, sometimes if we don't feel like we have a plan, maybe we're not willing to listen to the voice just yet. We're like, let me figure this out first. But one thing I've been thinking a bunch about in the last, honestly, like since the new year, I guess you could say, is this concept of just like, there will never be a perfect time. Like, it's not a new idea, right? Like it's an idea that's, I've read about it. I've tried to convince myself of it. And yet it's very hard, at least for me, to like commit to something that's like, that feels scary sometimes, because I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'll start writing that article once I have all the research done, right?
Yeah.
Guess what? By the time I've read the first 10, there's 2 more articles that have been like, it's one of those things where that's endless, and it's almost just another way to continue procrastinating on the thing you actually want to do. And so like, I mean, this is an example of just being like, okay, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just, let's just have fun with it and like see where it goes. And you never know, like even that is information, right? Even if it's not perfect or good or whatever. Anyway, so that I just, that's
whole... what I love. That's what I love about this setup that you guys are doing, where it's just like, we just know we want to talk to some people. We have a sense of who we want to talk to. Let's just show up and ask some questions. And like, I mean, real-time review, it's great. So like, do more of this.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it on the podcast.
I endorse anyone listening to this podcast. You're making a great choice.
Yeah, if you actually go to our YouTube channel, the banner image just says, "We're just fucking around."
Amazing. Yeah.
It's so we're really taking that part seriously. Great. I was gonna, you know what's really funny, Catherine? You said journalist. And I think you've used the word 3 times, so I'm just gonna press on it. We said that's the sexiest job you could ever think of, right? It was like glamorous in a way, almost, to you, to hear people's stories and to tell stories that are not told. Was that like, okay, I'm not gonna lead again. Why? What is it?
We're Vivek. We've made him so conscious. Mostly me.
No, this is great.
I'm not, yeah. No,
leaving it open is so much scarier for me, which is great. It makes me think more. Yeah.
Well, if you're too scared, let me know. I have like 25 leading questions.
I mean that in a great way. You're doing everything right. So that's really funny. I didn't realize I had used. So I said sexiest thing I could think of like 3 times.
Yeah, I underlined it the 3rd time. I was like, wow, there's something there. It's there. I don't know. Was it
You're
because
like,
of the world
traveling aspect? She's saying it more emphatically. I'm starting to believe.
No, because it was like, it's an unusual choice, right? Like, it's like, I wouldn't, well, tech is different, but nobody would say, oh, being an engineer is the sexiest job. Like some people might, but it's like, it's the fact that you chose it. I mean, it felt very deliberately, it felt like there was something there.
You were drawn to it. Like it seems almost.
I mean,
there was an eros there.
Yeah, totally. There is an eros there. I mean, one of my favorite movies as a kid was All the President's Men, which is the telling of the 2 journalists at the Washington Post who broke the Watergate scandal for Nixon. And that, of course, it was a glorified retelling. Of course, whatever. And like Robert Redford being in it did not hurt. So that was, I was like, that's what journalism is? Great. Sign me up. Bring down a president with this cutie. I'll do it. But no, I think, I mean, that was part of it, right? But I think.
Should have been the tagline with the movie.
Inspiring young women everywhere to get into journalism. I think, how do I break down what the eros is, what's so appealing about it. There's some part of, speaking truth to power, being a little bit of being a voice of conscience that's a little bit outside the system, or at least kind of positions itself as being outside the system, however true or not true that ends up being. There's a great sense of kind of this is for the public good, a kind of like social responsibility and a sense of nobility, trying to I said speak truth to power. I think that's probably the quickest, the easiest, simplest way to say it. I think there's also elements of, Vidhika, you touched on this a little bit, the difference between just kind of reporting this happened and then this happened versus a little more storytelling that is still fact checked heavily, that is still, true, but gets a little more into the meat of things. I think those sorts of long form storytelling have always been really interesting to me, because it's not just, what is this corrupt business or this corrupt government entity doing and who is it harming, and we have to sound the alarm. Journalism can also be, here is the story of how this particular object was embraced in this surprising way in this different context, or here's a surprising story about how these communities overlapped in a cool, interesting way. And so it is almost like it's like investigation in that way. The curiosity behind it, where it can take you in the world, is really fascinating to me. And so I think that sort of getting to travel the world and tell stories, or just be in DC and tell stories, felt really appealing. And I think writing, I was a voracious reader as a kid. And I think the idea of being able to write also for a living was very appealing. So, yeah.
I have kind of a question, Catherine, based on the power of story. And like you mentioned something earlier that I thought was really cool about like insisting on other people taking their stories seriously. I love that line. And you mentioned how it helped you kind of with your own story. I would love to hear a little bit about what that connection was like. Like, how did, telling other people's stories impact your relationship with your own?
A couple ways. So my mind's going in kind of two different directions. I think I prefer to tell other people's stories rather than my own, and in a public way. I'm much more comfortable, instead of sort of personally narrating, sort of opening it up to a question or opening it up to interviewing other people instead.
Notice.
Has this come up a couple times? But I think a lot of that for me is a way of making sense of my own story. I think one example I can give is I was in a pretty bad car accident about 10 years ago now. And shortly afterward, I wrote a piece on it about healing and things I wish I had known about trauma before this.
It's a wonderful piece. I've read it. It is wonderful.
Thank you. What was really interesting about that is I didn't put myself in that at all. It was all personal reflections, but I did not include any elements of my story on purpose, because I thought I just didn't want to. It just kind of wasn't, I thought, I'm trying to write about things I wish I had learned, and I want this to be accessible to other people in a way that doesn't need my own story in it. But what's interesting is I was actually drawing most of those lessons from something that had happened 5 years earlier, not something that had happened 2 months earlier. And most people didn't really know that, which was also interesting. I was like, that's for me to know, like, where I earned that wisdom. But what was interesting about that is after I wrote it, these comments are now lost because the publication has since changed servers, but people started sharing their stories very personally and vulnerably in the comment section, which at the time, the comment section of any publication was like a war zone. So that was just not like vulnerable expressing of personal stories was not really something that happened in the comment sections, and it did here. And that was super interesting to me, because I thought I just wrote something out of this knee jerk, someone had sent a prompt we want to do a top 10 list of, stuff for our publication. What are you thinking about? And I was like, well, I'm thinking about trauma. I was like, I'll just write mine. This is like bleak January New Year's Day piece. But people responded so like, it was like they needed it. Like they needed to hear this. And I was like, I'm just some random lady. Like I do not possess insight and access to like higher wisdom. I just literally am like, I wish I had known this stuff. But people were like, yeah, we wish we had known that too. And the way that people responded were like, we don't have these stories. We don't have this dialogue in our own lives. And this piece was important in that way. So I kind of held on to that for a while. I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I was not at all interested in like telling my story more on top of it. It just was sort of like, okay, that was a thing that was really helpful, wonderful. And then a few years later, I went to design school. And one of the classes was the lean startup thing. It was kind of like, what can you build and launch in 12 weeks? And everyone else was like building these amazing, hilarious student projects. And I was like, I think I want to maybe make something around trauma and healing. And I don't know how to do this exactly. But it was sort of like their responses on this article helped me understand the things that I needed for healing. And then I did a design research approach where in this class, I didn't talk with anyone I knew from kind of my old DC life that I knew would kind of have all these preconceived frameworks for trauma and healing and why I'd be working on this project. And instead, I asked all of my classmates if they had anyone that might be interested in a project on healing that would want to talk to me. And I got a bunch of people. And then in my interviews with them, I just said like, I know I'm a stranger, thanks for talking to me. But I said, don't worry we don't have to get into your own story or specifics at all. I'm just going to ask you some questions about like, what was helpful for your healing process? What would have been helpful? What's helpful now? Every single one of them told me their story in great detail. And it was like, when I was talking earlier about a gift, that was like one of those things that was a confirmation of both my own instincts to do more work when it comes to healing, but also like, my own need. I do need to tell my story. And as much as I love to like hide behind it, I sort of like saw how willing and almost relieved everyone I talked to was to get to share their story. And even though it didn't make it into any sort of public readout, I wasn't sharing their names, it was all kind of informed into this like workbook thing that I'd then built. It was a really beautiful challenge for me to be okay sharing my story with others as well. And like helping me put language to the things that I needed and I wasn't able to articulate until they did. That was a long answer, but yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I got chills actually at one point when you were talking about asking people, somebody else, like almost referring someone else in their lives, like, and trying to separate like those preconceived notions. Like that's such a giving it almost a fresh perspective so that you were a nobody, so to speak, in that story. That literally gave me chills, and it's just so beautiful. And there's a feedback loop, right? There's something about when you share the other person's vulnerability there's a sense of reciprocity where sometimes you want to, part of it's that you want to share, but part of it's you feel like you've been given permission. And to some extent, you there's this dance between wanting to be seen and wanting to hide and wanting to be seen and wanting to hide. And it's really fascinating how things like that. And I imagine the article that you wrote, even though you didn't share specifics about your story, I read it a couple of years ago when you did your healing salon, which, by the way, Vivek, I know you weren't there. I don't think we knew each other then, but it was fantastic. Amir and Catherine co-hosted this salon, and it was just, even in that container, I remember how vulnerable, people were. But I was just going to say, in the article, even without the specifics, I think there is something to when you have been through something and you write about it or talk about it, right? Like, just the words you use and the way you say certain things, I'm convinced there's some sort of resonance in a way that like, it's almost like only those that have been through it can pick up on. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember I lost my dad last year. And when after that happened, like, there were, a lot of people were really kind and tried to provide consolation and say kind words. And I appreciated all of them, right? Because I know everyone was trying their best. And if anything, I have to admit, it taught me how terrible I was in the past at responding appropriately, because I did not know better. I was like, oh man, like it's really not helpful when someone says X thing, and I'm pretty sure I've said that thing before. Recalibrated my approach entirely. But one thing that stood out to me was the messages that really just that kind of hit in a good way, like obviously in a painful way, but in a really resonant way where I was like, oh my God, I feel like they understand. I didn't know it at the time, but later on I found out that almost every one of those messages that really just was like, I felt so cared for and so seen, all of them had lost a parent, you know? And there was this really, I didn't know before that. And I was just like, wow, this was so sweet. And then later on I found out and I was like, oh my God, it must be because it's coming from a place of like this inner knowing that you can't get another way.
So. Yeah. So in a sense, it almost sounds like the ways that you all shared stories, even though that wasn't articulated, like you feel it, like that helped you kind of, make sense of your own story because of what they were sharing. Yeah.
Sort of.
I'm just going to close. Like, I know Catherine has a hard stop, but I just wanted to say one thing I picked up in like a lot of the things you said, Catherine, is like very connected to something Vidhika and I talked about earlier, which is courage, right? And so you said when you feel like you've missed the boat, at some point you just decided you're just not going to care, right? It's such a badass move, right? Also with the speaking truth to power, aspect, the conscience, why is there eros? Why is there sexiness in something like that? There's a sense of courage. There's a sense of bravery. There's a sense of almost like a tearing through of limitation, and also with the vulnerability piece, like which we've been talking about here. I mean, vulnerability is courage in some sense, right? To be able to go first.
Being courageous about your inner world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. To tell it, So yeah, a lot to do with that. I love that theme, and I just wanted to say, thanks for sharing all your stories.
Oh my gosh, it was a gift to share. I hope it felt like a gift to receive.
It absolutely was, and it was just. I feel like we just scratched the surface. There's so many more
exactly.
I want to hear.
We have like topic after topic after topic here, like online versus online.
I know. I was like so excited to because I know
spontaneous coordination in soccer and social dancing, organic laissez-faire.
We can do a redo of this with no agenda, but perhaps 6 or 7 bullet points that we know we want to touch on.
Yes, we'll have to get there. And one quick thing, I don't think we actually ever talked about how we know each other. And I don't actually remember where Catherine, where we first met each other. I know it was through the II. I know you were in my conversation salon, but I feel like we might have talked before that. I'm not really sure, but I remember.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it was bonding over poetry. I think there was some, because we did go to a few of each other's salons, but I think there was some, I can't remember if it was a poetry channel or something, but I think there was a lot of Mary Oliver happening, and then something else. But I think that might have been how we first started chatting.
Yeah. And that's something that Catherine and I realized, like, I guess, poetry was one thing. And then like just the melding of like the physical and digital worlds, like all that kind of stuff. So interesting. And we'll have to chat about it again sometime soon.
Yes.
It's evolved even more since then.
Yes.
We'll definitely have you on again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is such a joy.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah. Especially with the very cryptic, like, hey, we don't really know what we're doing, but we want to chat with cool people. Want to talk to us?
No, I was so glad to get that invite, and especially get the reminder follow-up. So thank you for that. No, thank you both so much. And I'm excited you're doing this project, so I can't wait to see where else it goes.
Yeah, we're trying to risk some delight. We'll have to dig into.
Oh yeah, actually, before you leave, if there's like 30 seconds you can say about risking delight, where did that come from, and why do you say that?
The poem by Jack Gilbert called "A Brief for the Defense." And
sorry, I think I missed the first part. Is it a poem?
It's a poem. Yep.
Okay.
By a poet called Jack Gilbert, and it's called "A Brief for the Defense." And it ends with this is toward the end, and it says, we must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight. And that's been such an interesting challenge to me in many different ways. But I think the idea that thematically being courageous and joyful in life kind of is the stuff of life, despite all of the many other things that life throws at us. So yeah, I carried it with me for a while.
It's the thing that always sticks out to me about your profile. Like when I first read it, I haven't read the poem, but now I'm going to. Yeah, it's especially the word risk. It's so specific, you know.
It is. Delight is risky. It's emotionally risky. It can be, the pursuit of it can be socially risky. It can be mentally, financially, what have you, professionally risky. So no, I'm with you. I think the wording of that phrase is perfect.
Yeah.
It's also just like so trenchant. It's such a trenchant, like subliminal attack on cynicism, you know? Risking delight is something, I mean, cynicism is such a safe choice, and
it's so easy.
It's very easy. It's very, static. It's, it doesn't take much of us. And this is like, it's very trenchant. That's the word that keeps coming. It's like it's puncturing something in the whole cynical.
Good.
It's kind of speaking truth to power, which is something you mentioned.
Hey.
It has those vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking truth to cynical teenagers and power alike.
I was a cynic until very recently, so I'm a recovering-ish cynic. I mean, no.
We were considering naming this podcast "Recovering Cynics."
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, because that's also the reality, right? Is like reality bends towards cynicism, but like, okay, it also, like, we don't survive through knowing that things are hard and that pain is coming, and like that's not what makes life worth living, and that's also not how we survive.
It's almost the difference between being accurate. Like, it's like, yes, maybe it's true that things are kind of bleak, but the idea of like optimism as an act of rebellion, like that is really powerful to me. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. Oh man, there's so much more to talk about.
I know.
Even just the difference between like accuracy and truth, because it is accurate that the world is hard and bad things happen and things are random and there's reason to be cynical. But like, that's not the whole truth. The truth is that there is delight, there is joy, that like,
the truth is that a miracle is happening every second. This whole thing is a miracle, right? That is that's also the truth.
And this whole thing is a miracle, and scene. Okay. I know. Okay. Well, anyway. I will.
Okay.
I will
Thank you so much, Catherine.
Now.
Okay. Say bye, Vidhika.
Bye, Catherine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye, both.
Talk to you later.